The cage door is open. The bird isn't leaving. I want you to hold that image, because by the end of this video, you will understand exactly which part of your life that bird represents. There is a pattern that appears in every civilization that ever existed, in every philosophy that ever mattered, in every person who ever found genuine peace. The wisest people in history, at a certain point in their lives, quietly disappeared. Not dramatically, not angrily. They didn't send the final message. They didn't make the grand exit. They simply, gradually, became less available, less reachable, less present in spaces that had never truly deserved them. And the people left behind had one question. What? That question is what this video answers. Let me describe something that is happening in your life right now. There are people in it who operate on a particular assumption. The assumption is that your energy, your attention, your patience, your emotional availability, is a resource with no bottom. A well that refills automatically. An account that never goes into debt. And so they draw from it freely. The friend who calls only in crisis. Never in ordinary Tuesday moments when you might also need something. The relationship where you are the one who initiates, apologizes, compromises, adjusts, while the other person simply receives your effort like a salary they're owed. The family member whose approval you have been chasing for so long that you have forgotten it was ever a choice to chase it. This is not a character flaw in you. It is actually a sign of something good. Your capacity for loyalty, for patience, for giving people more chances than they have earned. But here is what Arthur Schopenhauer observed, and I want to be precise about this. Schopenhauer did not teach selective ghosting. He taught something deeper. He taught that the will, the fundamental drive of all human life, is insatiable. It cannot be satisfied. We'll always want more. And what this means, applied to your relationships, is that people who take from you without returning are not doing so because they are evil. They are doing so because you have made it possible. You have trained the dynamic. You have taught them, through your endless availability, that there is no cost to extraction. Schopenhauer's uncomfortable truth: the person being consumed is always in some way a willing participant. Not because they deserve it, because they haven't yet decided to stop. In 1889, Friedrich Nietzsche suffered a complete mental collapse in a piazza in Turin. He saw a horse being beaten in the street. He ran to it, threw his arms around its neck, and wept until he lost consciousness. He never recovered. The last 11 years of his life were spent in a state of complete mental dissolution. I tell you this not to diminish him, but to humanize him. Because Nietzsche, more than almost any other thinker, is quoted as if he were made of iron. As if he floated above ordinary human suffering. He did not. And yet, before the collapse, he wrote something that remains one of the most psychologically precise observations about human relationships ever committed to paper. The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly. Now I want to be clear. Nietzsche was writing about the philosopher's solitude. About intellectual elevation. He was not writing a manual for ghosting people. But the psychological truth in that sentence applies to something you have felt. There comes a point in certain relationships where you have grown, genuinely, painfully, quietly grown, and the person across from you has not grown with you. And they experience your growth not as something to admire but as something to diminish. Your ambition becomes arrogance. Your boundaries become coldness. Your silence becomes a problem to be solved. The higher you move, the more threatening your altitude becomes to people who have chosen to stay on the ground. This is the moment many wise people begin their gradual, quiet withdrawal. Not because they are better than the people they're leaving, but because, as Nietzsche understood, the cost of staying small to make others comfortable is the highest price a person can pay. Here is where the science enters, and what it reveals is darker than most people expect. Research published in multiple studies on social rejection confirms something philosophers intuited centuries earlier. Being suddenly cut off from someone you're attached to activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. The same region of your brain. The same intensity of signal. Your body cannot tell the difference between a broken relationship and a broken bone. Now, here's the part that matters for this video. This mechanism works in both directions. When you are the one who withdraws, when you are the one who goes quiet, you are not being passive. You are using the most ancient social signal the human nervous system knows how to read. Words in certain relationships have been devalued. You have explained. You have asked. You have expressed. And each time the words have been received, processed, and ignored. Because words require no cost from the person receiving them. They can nod. They can apologize. They can perform understanding without changing anything. Absence is different. Absence cannot be nodded at. Absence cannot be apologized away in a 5-minute conversation. Absence costs the other person something real, the thing they had assumed was unlimited. Carl Jung wrote about what he called the shadow, the suppressed, unacknowledged parts of ourselves. And his observation, which I want to interpret carefully, not attribute directly to this situation, was that what we suppress eventually speaks anyway. If you suppress your need to be valued for long enough, it eventually stops asking. It stops expressing. It withdraws. And what looks like ghosting from the outside is, from the inside, the shadow finally being heard by the person who created it. You are not disappearing. You are finally arriving somewhere else. Miyamoto Musashi 161 duels. He never lost one. He also never had a permanent home. Never married. Never accumulated possessions he wasn't willing to leave. In the final years of his life, he retreated to a cave called Ryagando and wrote what would become one of the most studied texts on strategy ever produced, the Book of Five Rings. His central discipline, the one beneath everything, was this: do nothing that is of no use. 5 words. Now, Musashi was writing about swordsmanship, about battle, about the elimination of wasted movement. But what he understood about physical combat maps precisely onto something most people never apply to their emotional lives. Every wasted movement in a duel costs you. Every unnecessary step gives your opponent an opening. Every action performed out of habit rather than intention is a vulnerability. And in your relationships, every conversation you keep having that changes nothing is a wasted movement. Every explanation offered to someone who has already decided not to hear it is a wasted movement. Every moment of availability extended to someone who treats it as their right rather than your gift is a wasted movement. Musashi did not explain his exits. He did not perform closure. He did not send the final message that would make his departure comfortable for the person he was leaving. He redirected his energy toward what was of use, his attention toward what sharpened rather than dulled him, his presence toward spaces that deserved it. And he became, in his own words, a man who walks alone. Not because he was cold. Not because he was broken. Because he had made a precise, conscious, warrior's decision about where his finite energy would go. And he never second-guessed it. Let me return to the bird. The cage door has been open the entire time. The question I asked at the beginning was, why won't it leave? And I think you know the answer now. Because the cage is familiar. Because leaving requires admitting that staying was a choice, and that is a more uncomfortable truth than believing you were trapped. The wisest people in history did not ghost dramatically. They did not announce their departure. They did not write the letter explaining everything. They simply, over time, redirected what was precious. Schopenhauer withdrew from social circles that consumed without returning. Nietzsche understood the altitude cost of genuine growth. Musashi eliminated everything of no use from his life, without ceremony. None of them called it ghosting. None of them framed it as a strategy or a power move. They framed it as what it actually is, a decision about where finite energy goes. You have a limited number of mornings. A limited number of moments where you are fully present, fully alive, fully capable of giving something real. The question is not whether to give. The question is, to whom? And to that question, finally, quietly, you are allowed to answer honestly. Selective withdrawal is not cruelty. It is not punishment. It is not a game designed to make someone miss you. It is the decision, made in private, without announcement, without the need for anyone's understanding, to spend your remaining mornings on something worthy of them. Viktor Frankl wrote this in Man's Search for Meaning. Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. The stimulus is someone treating you as less than you are. The old response was to explain, to try harder, to stay available, to keep the cage door closed from the inside. The new response, the philosopher's response, is to simply choose differently. Without performance. Without announcement. Without anger. Just quietly, leave. Because silence is not absence. It is the sound of someone who has finally decided that their energy is worth more than the places it has been going.